What you're about to see has actually been in the works for about 15 years. So just for a bit, let's go back in time to the year 2010, where we first premiered this production at the Star Theater in Dansville, New York.
2010 was a celebration and a revival for the Castle of Wellness. Finally, a documentary with undeniable proof that this forgotten historical landmark in Dansville, New York was more than just a legend, but a reality. Today was the day that the secrets of the Castle of Wellness were about to be unveiled.
How many people do you think were here tonight want to see it?
We have 280 seats and room for about 30 handicapped. We turned away over 200 people.
Do you think there's a possibility for a second showing?
I'm game.
Excellent.
It was sold out! 285!
Oh my gosh.
It's sold out!
Oh my gosh.
She was the last person.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We were so close. I mean, I thought he was kidding.
I think he should have charged more money, actually.
We look forward to this for a week, and we got here by 7 o'clock, and it was already sold out. And there were about 100 people standing here. My friend Ann came up from Florida.
You came from Florida?
Florida.
Yes, and I won't be here to see, I'll be gone by the time you show a second showing.
But we definitely need a second showing.
Well, maybe we need to get this thing on PBS, and then everybody can see it.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yes.
Well, this was a sold-out presentation, and I guess you could say a performance too, right?
It was very exciting to see the parts of what you're going to be putting together and delivering the message of how important wellness is in today's market.
I've never seen such excitement for a documentary. What did you think, everybody?
I thought it was a great film. I really did. I enjoyed it very much.
It was wonderful.
I suggested a matinee in the afternoon for the people 55 and older, because they're the ones that remember Bernard McFadden.
My mother worked up the castle on the hill, and I lived in Clara Barton House, sir, below the castle on the hill.
Wow.
I was born there.
So you liked it?
Oh, it was great.
I don't think a lot of people know a lot about the castle, especially my generation of people. Just done a wonderful job.
Excuse me?
It was very good. I really enjoyed it. It was interesting, and there's a lot of history I didn't know. So
I'll tell you what, I just moved up here from Philadelphia, and I'll tell you, it was very enlightening. I thought it was put together very well, and didn't realize the town of Dansville has such a history behind it.
I thought it was excellent, excellent. In fact, we have a picture of my grandfather's house with McFadden, and it would be my great-grandmother.
We were born here, but we didn't know all that.
Well, most people don't.
Well, you just saw the video of the response for the premiere. I was elated because I saw this response when it actually happened, and I thought, my goodness, this is wonderful, because it fits into all our plans, because I was told prior to this by an executive of the local PBS station that this production could be shown locally and perhaps even nationally. The only criteria was it had to meet PBS content standards. Unfortunately, we were told that this production did not meet the station's content standards. When I pursued that, I really didn't get any clear answer. I guess I was just very naive. But now I do know the answer. And as you watch this, you'll soon know what the answer is too. When I appeared on the PBS special, Be Healthy for Life, I had occasion there to meet one of the producers, really nice guy, and he gave me some really great advice about how to tell this amazing story in my documentary. As a young boy growing up, I had zero athletic ability. I couldn't make any of the teams in school. When I was about 13 years old, I came across this magazine. The name of the magazine was Physical Culture, and right on the headline it said, "Transform your body, transform your life." I read and reread that magazine, and I looked at every before and after picture, and boy was I inspired. But what really, really inspired me was the author, Bernard McFadden. It was easy to tell, even for a young boy, that he was a visionary, and I learned later, probably 100 years ahead of his time. I can tell what you're thinking right now. Who the heck is Bernard McFadden? You probably don't know, and most people don't know, because his legacy and all of his great work have been completely erased, expunged from American history books by some very, very powerful vested interests. But through a very, very strange sequence of events, my son calls it supernatural, I call it at the very, very least bizarre, we were actually able to meet, talk with, and interview Bernard McFadden's right-hand man, Ed Bowden.
Okay, I have a tape recorder ready. What kind of guy was McFadden? Was he a nice guy? He was a great dealer. He was, yeah. He was a great man. He did a lot of good. Do you have some stuff that McFadden wrote? Yeah. You do, huh? And what did he say to you? Where are the vultures?
Talking with Ed Bowden, he affirmed what I had known for, I guess, about 65 or 70 years. And that is that the wellness movement that we know today started at the Castle of Wellness on top of the hill in Dansville, New York.
Looking at these makeshift stairs, it's hard to imagine that this entryway once greeted the rich and famous from around the world. It's sad to look at the decaying exterior of this once magnificent structure. Walking through the interior, it's shocking to witness the effects of more than a half-century of neglect, abuse, and vandalism. Why was the elegant lobby of this once world-renowned health center left to be ravaged by the sands of time? After all, this is the Castle of Wellness, the castle on the hill in Dansville, New York.
Because we're big fans of the castle.
Why?
Because it's history.
It's history?
Yes, it's history, but today everybody knows how important it is to stay hydrated. The word hydration is relatively new in our vocabulary. The importance of drinking water for our health goes back to the mid-1800s and Dr. Caleb Jackson and the water cure. And what was the water cure?
Passing the village of Dansville, driving on Highway 390, the sight of the regal building on the wooded hillside inspires both awe and curiosity. What the casual onlooker could never know is that this magnificent brick edifice is the holiest shrine in the American health movement and is a national treasure. In the next hour, you'll find out why the world we live in today would be a much different place had this building never existed. The original structure was built in the 1880s. But its origins date back to the year 1798, when Dansville's pioneer settlers discovered that a new spring had burst forth from the hill, sending water cascading down the slopes. In the 1850s, a Rochester businessman named Nathaniel Bingham tested the water and declared it to have therapeutic properties. Bingham's attempt to create a health resort based on that spring met with little success. But in 1858, Dr. James Caleb Jackson came to town, and under his oversight, the resort he called Our Home on the Hillside attained a national reputation. Dr. Jackson was an advocate of an alternative therapy known as the water cure, which was based on abstinence from all fatty foods, sugar, and alcohol, replaced by a natural diet of fresh fruits, vegetables, and the use of pure, clean water applied externally and internally. A notable advocate of the benefits of the water cure was naturalist Charles Darwin, who created a firestorm of controversy with his publication of The Origin of Species.
Do you know that the sales of cold breakfast cereals are in the billions of dollars every year?
Dad, what does this have to do with the castle?
With the castle? It has everything to do with the castle. The fact is that Dr. Caleb Jackson invented, produced, and marketed the very first cold breakfast cereal sold in this nation. It's also a little known fact that the first breakfast cereal was called granola.
A little-known fact is that Dr. Caleb Jackson was the inventor of granola, which was the very first cold breakfast cereal. With granola, Dr. Jackson hoped to replace the standard American breakfast, which then consisted of pork and potatoes. The basic ingredient of granola consisted of whole grains. Guests at Our Home on the Hill were so enthusiastic about granola, they requested that the cereal be shipped to them when they returned home. Enthusiasm for granola increased to the point that to meet the growing demand, Dr. Jackson constructed and operated the first cold cereal processing facility in the nation on Main Street in the village of Dansville. Visitors to the Jackson Sanatorium included Ellen G. White, who founded the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and some believe that portions of Dr. Jackson's writings, including The Laws of Life, were incorporated into the doctrine of that church. By some coincidence, in 1887, another sanatorium operator, Dr. Harvey Kellogg, also developed a cereal and also called his product granola. Word of Kellogg's new cold breakfast cereal quickly spread, and when it reached Dr. Jackson, he sued Kellogg for infringement on his brand name. A settlement was reached, and Dr. Kellogg changed the name of his cereal to granola with an O. John Post, shown here with his daughter Marjorie, also operated a sanatorium in Battle Creek and started another cereal company with the introduction of his Post Grape Nuts brand, thus earning Battle Creek the prestigious title of cereal capital of the world. Due to the much larger manufacturing and distribution channels by both Post and Kellogg, the sales of granola plummeted, and the Jackson family discontinued the manufacture of granola. The Sunrise Diner now occupies the former site of the old granola building.
Now this is what I call a healthy snack. A granola bar and a green smoothie. So the next time you have munch on a granola bar or have some granola in your cereal, just think for a minute about Dr. Jackson, the Castle of Wellness, and granola.
And now it's time for Fascinating Facts from the Castle of Wellness. Fascinating fact number 1, the house that granola built. As we know, the story begins at the Castle of Wellness in Dansville, New York, with Dr. Jackson and his creation of a whole grain cold breakfast cereal he called granola. Following in Dr. Jackson's footsteps, Dr. Harvey Kellogg, the owner of a sanatorium in Battle Creek, Michigan, also began to manufacture and sell a similar product he also called granola. As a result of a civil court case filed by Dr. Jackson, Dr. Kellogg changed the name of his cereal from granola to granola. Charles William Post was an American entrepreneur and a former patient at the Kellogg Sanatorium. Witnessing Dr. Kellogg's great success marketing granola, he decided to start his own cold breakfast cereal company and successfully launched a product he named Post Grape Nuts that subsequently created a fortune for his family. Charles Post and his daughter, Marjorie. Marjorie Post, now a very wealthy society debutante who ultimately met and married another multimillionaire, the legendary Wall Street broker and financier E.F. Hutton. Following their marriage, Marjorie and E.F. Hutton planned and designed their dream home. When their dream home was completed, they called it Mar-a-Lago. Today, Mar-a-Lago is the home of President Trump and his family. So, following the sequence of this story, Mar-a-Lago is the house that granola built. Whoops, I'm sorry, Dr. Jackson. I mean the house that granola built.
Well, I just have to say I had no idea that Dansville was such an important part of the American history, especially for the women's movement. If it wasn't for Dansville, I could still be wearing one of those skirts that was down around my ankles.
That lady you just heard was absolutely right.
Dad, what does this have to do with the castle?
It has everything to do with the castle. The woman was just talking about the work of Dr. Harriet Austin, one of Dr. Jackson's assistants. I actually call her the fashion doctor.
Assisting Dr. Jackson in his efforts in Dansville was Dr. Harriet Austin, a female physician in an era when female physicians were almost unheard of. She was an ardent believer in women's dress reform and created what she called the American costume, in which the traditional floor-length woman's garment was replaced by a shorter-length dress, coupled with trouser legs to preserve the modesty of the times. Female patients at the Water Cure were encouraged to wear Dr. Austin's American costume and leave the uncomfortable and unhealthy whalebone corsets in the closet.
It was happening in Paris and it was happening in New York City. But one of the most important changes in women's fashion was the one that occurred in Dansville, New York, where the work of Dr. Harriet Austin hearkened the beginning of the end of those whalebone corsets that constricted and restricted the function of vital organs. This was a great step forward in women's health.
And now it's time for Fascinating Facts from the Castle of Wellness. Fascinating fact number 2, the pantsuit revolution. Amelia Bloomer is credited with creating the first women's slacks or trousers. The women's right movement credits Mrs. Bloomer for this culture-changing style of fashion, but this is only partially true. The fact is that her design ultimately evolved into women's athletic wear, as shown by this vintage photo of a women's basketball team. And these girls are dressed and ready to play sports. The original American costume as designed by Dr. Harriet Austin. And this photo shows two ladies wearing a fashion update of Austin's American costume with trousers covered by a partial front skirt. Here's an early version of Austin's straight leg pantsuit. Today, the woman's pantsuit is more popular than ever, serving as both professional and casual wear. Coming up, the greatest story never told. The secret history of the father of wellness, Bernard McFadden.
Okay, but before we get to the main event or the feature attraction, I'd like to talk about an exceptional woman, a name you all know, Clara Barton. Just about everybody knows that Clara Barton was the one who started the American Red Cross. She also served with great valor during the American Civil War, acting as a nurse to the Union soldiers. Following the war, Clara became very, very ill. In an attempt to regain her health, Clara went to a sanatorium in Europe. It was in Europe that she learned about the great work being done by the International Red Cross. Clara Barton was really inspired by the work she saw being done by the International Red Cross. And although she really wasn't feeling any better, she was inspired and determined to return to the United States and start an American Red Cross.
Most children are taught about the heroic Civil War service of Red Cross founder Clara Barton, but some facts are not taught. For example, her little-known but critical connection to the castle in Dansville.
How the castle in Dansville was instrumental in helping Clara Barton overcome illness and start the first chapter of the American Red Cross.
Home again in the United States, Clara Barton was determined to start an American Red Cross. Being diagnosed at age 55 as being seriously ill, Clara Barton actually came to Dansville as a patient of Dr. James Jackson at the Jackson Sanatorium, then known as Our House on the Hill, where she remained as a patient for 2 years. Upon recovery, she chose to stay in Dansville and remained a resident there for the next 10 years. In the year 1912, Sarah Barton died at the age of 90, concluding her lifetime legacy of public service and extraordinary accomplishment. She had established the first chapter of the American Red Cross in Dansville, New York on August 2, 1881, and went on to establish chapters throughout our nation. It must never be forgotten that Dansville was the first child of the American Red Cross. Based on her return to health through Dr. Jackson's methods, Clara Barton issued the following statement. The general means of promoting health is through proper food, water, bathing, dress, sunshine, open air, and pleasant surroundings. Little or no medications are relied upon.
And now it's time for Fascinating Facts from the Castle of Wellness. Fascinating fact number 3, the Google conspiracy theory.
This is more than just a fascinating fact. It's unbelievable. When I was searching on Google for Clara Barton, scrolling down the first page, there was no association with her and Dr. Jackson, the Castle of Wellness, or Dansville, New York. You might wonder why. Well, that question will be answered when we reveal the untold story of Bernard McFadden.
Coming up, the greatest story never told. The secret history of the father of wellness, Bernard McFadden.
Now, this is important. This is where everything changes. In the year 1882, the original Castle on the Hill was completely destroyed by fire. I really don't know how to say this, but like the phoenix rising from the ashes, there was a new beginning.
In 1882, disaster struck when an overturned kerosene lamp in a patient's room touched off a fire that completely destroyed the original wooden health resort. By this time, the water cure was being run by James Jackson's son, Dr. James Jr., and his daughter-in-law, Dr. Kate Jackson. Their decision to rebuild came quickly. On October 1st, 1883, only a year after the first brick was laid, the Jackson Sanatorium was officially dedicated. Outside of a large city, one would have been hard-pressed to find a building of such magnitude anywhere in the nation. It was fireproof, stood 5 stories tall. The cost to build today would be in the tens of millions of dollars. James Jackson Jr. received his training at the University of Buffalo. His wife Kate, also a physician and valedictorian of her graduating class. Although both were physicians in the traditional sense, Drs. James and Kate Jackson were holistic physicians in the true sense. Together, their practice incorporated the most current traditional medical procedures with both water and alternative cures. The new facility included bright, cheerful, airy patient rooms and a ballroom to host guest speakers and provide entertainment and dancing for guests. Jackson's healing embraced the dimensions of mankind, emphasizing patients' spiritual, social, and intellectual needs, making the new Jackson Sanatorium one of the first truly holistic healing facilities in the nation. The Jackson prescription for health included fresh air, sunshine, moderate exercise, and a diet of whole foods with fresh fruits and vegetables grown in the sanatorium's greenhouse.
I'm sorry. I really have to break in right here. This is very, very important. Going to the Mayo Clinic website, which was developed, I believe, in the early 1990s, they talk about complementary medicine. CAM is an acronym that means Complementary Alternative Medicine, which is simply combining alternative medicine and traditional medicine. Integrated medicine. This is exactly what Dr. James Jackson and Kate Jackson were doing in the late 1800s. It's only taken us 100 years to realize the value of what they were doing. And because of what they were doing, which was integrative medicine that was not accepted at that time, it ultimately led to the closing of the sanatorium. Today, prestigious universities such as Yale and Harvard are now teaching integrative medicine.
Jackson added a pharmacy. There were medical doctors and registered nurses on the staff. The sanatorium became an educational facility, being registered with the New York State Board of Regents to include a school of nursing. The Jackson practice included electrotherapy, based on designs by electrical genius Nikola Tesla, a well-known name to every student of electrical engineering, and shown here with his close friend and author, Mark Twain. Tesla's theories of healing utilized electronic technology and were not accepted by the traditional medical community. In the 1900s, the practice of medicine was becoming monopolized. Generally, only members of the AMA were permitted residence in the new, larger hospitals. Tesla's electrotherapy, or any form of healing not approved by the traditional medical establishment, was discarded. Based on these factors, the popularity of the Jackson water cure diminished, and the sanatorium declared bankruptcy in 1914. It appeared to be the end of the Jackson family health traditions as Dr. James and Kate Jackson and their loyal professional staff faded from the American medical landscape.
Now, the question you may be asking yourself right now is, why isn't the Castle on the Hill in Dansville, New York, an historical landmark? Just think about the people and all the things that happened at the Castle of Wellness. The beginning of today's multi-billion-dollar cold breakfast cereal industry. The women's fashion revolution. The beginning of the American Red Cross. Perhaps most significant, at least in my mind, the first facility to practice integrative medicine. Here's a really big question. Why wasn't the castle maintained? Why hasn't it been restored? If in fact it were, this would make Dansville and the castle a worldwide tourist destination.
Well, I'm going to ask, and then I want you to answer, because we're actually trying to campaign to tell the world who he is, because nobody knows. Nobody knows except for you guys, because you live here. Okay, so here we go. Who was the first man of health?
Bernard McFadden.
Who was the first man of health?
Bernard McFadden.
Bernard McFadden.
As you can see, it appears that just about everyone in the small town of Dansville, New York, knows the name Bernard McFadden. Unfortunately, for more than 100 years, the world has been deprived of the wisdom of Bernard McFadden. As you will see, utilizing his practices would have made today's healthcare system significantly more effective and efficient. Yes, infinitely more effective than the bloated, wasteful, bureaucratic, ineffective healthcare system that we have today. The mission of this production is to restore the legacy of Bernard McFadden by revealing many long suppressed facts. Now the time has come for you and the world to learn about a forgotten American hero who at one time was known worldwide as the father of physical culture, who today can be rightfully called the father of the wellness movement. Despite the distorted and defaming information you might find in books written about Bernard McFadden and the false information you're going to find on the internet, this is the real and true story of Bernard McFadden and his crusade to build a healthier America.
1929 was a tragic year for the American economy, marking the beginning of the Great Depression, bringing with it unemployment, hunger, and despair. But ironically, this was the year that also marked the beginning of the second golden age for the Castle on the Hill. A private plane touched down at the small Dansville airport, bringing in a new owner, multi-millionaire publisher Bernard McFadden. Although virtually unknown today, Bernard McFadden was a household name in the 1920s and 30s. Even today, journalism schools recognize McFadden, along with William Randolph Hearst, as being the two most important publishers in the first half of the 20th century. His wealth allowed him the luxury of piloting his own private airplane. His business interests included real estate development and a multitude of business enterprises. The McFadden publishing offices were located on Broadway in New York City. The sign on the side of McFadden Publishing proudly announced the largest newsstand sales in the world, a true statement. The cornerstone of McFadden Publications was True Story, which at the time was the largest-selling magazine in the history of the industry. Another successful True magazine was True Detective, where McFadden published the names and photographs of criminals that he called the 10 most wanted. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was so impressed by this feature that he instructed the Bureau to begin publishing a list of the 10 most wanted criminals being sought for federal crimes. This was the beginning of America's most wanted list of criminals. An indication of McFadden's popularity was the fact that 3 biographies on his life had been published. McFadden's fame and fortune provided access to the rich and famous, as we see one of his daughters in a mock boxing pose with heavyweight boxing champ Jack Dempsey, with child star The Little Princess Shirley Temple. Here's the king of Hollywood, Clark Gable, with the popular crooner Rudy Vallée, and in his office with his family and silent movie heartthrob Rudolph Valentino. McFadden's scope of influence even reached to the White House, as illustrated in this photo of McFadden and President Franklin Roosevelt. The questions you may now be asking are, why haven't I heard of Bernard McFadden? Why did he purchase the building in Dansville? These questions will be answered.
Again, the question, why did Bernard McFadden buy the castle in Dansville? It was because of its legacy, its great legacy that includes Dr. Caleb Jackson and his homeopathic medicine, Dr. James Jackson, his wife Kate, and their integrative medicine. It was also the place that Clara Barton received healing from Dr. Jackson, which allowed her to start the first chapter of the American Red Cross. That raises another question. How is it possible that most people have never heard of the man that developed the concept of the 10 most wanted, which is used today by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and even the subject of a popular TV show? A man who was so well known at that time that he had total access to some of the most popular and famous personalities of that era. So basically, Bernard McFadden is the most famous person you've probably never heard of. Let's go back for a minute and listen to Ed Bowden, editor-in-chief of Physical Culture magazine and one of McFadden's most trusted friends, when Ed tells us, beware of the vultures.
You have some stuff that McFadden wrote? Yeah. You do, huh? And what did he say to you? Beware of the vultures.
And today, unfortunately, the vultures that Ed Bowden was telling us about have picked the body of the legacy of Bernard McFadden down to the bone. And now it's time to tell the incredible story of Bernard McFadden.
The Ozark region of Missouri was especially hard hit following the Civil War and suffered a severe economic depression. It was into this bleak environment that Bernard Adolphus McFadden was born into abject poverty in Mill Spring, Missouri, August 16, 1868. Bernard's mother was physically and emotionally fragile, and his father was a raging, abusive alcoholic. Both his parents died before his 11th birthday, so the frail and sickly young boy was placed in an orphanage. He drifted for a period that included work as an indentured farm boy and a brief stint traveling as a hobo.
As you've just seen, Bernard McFadden's life had a very humble beginning. Right now, though, I'd like to share with you some very important facts that were really not included in the 2010 Rough Cut. The Medical Pharmaceutical Alliance has had more than a century, more than 100 years to build their case against Bernard McFadden. It was our objective. It's our main focus in producing this documentary. We want you, the viewer, to serve as a jury as we present our case to restore the legacy of Bernard McFadden.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we're not only going to prove that Bernard McFadden is the father of the wellness movement, we're going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that his methods on preventative medicine are not only recommended, but claimed by today's healthcare industry as their own. His methods have been suppressed for more than 100 years. Okay, now stay with me for a second, because this is important. I mean, today's important, because today we are going to restore the legacy of the great Bernard McFadden. In order to properly present this case, I have to give you a little background. There are events in McFadden's early childhood that actually shaped his character. There are events that gave him the passion to go on a lifelong crusade for wellness. There are events that gave him the motivation and the drive to go from rags to riches and live the American dream.
When McFadden was a young boy, a smallpox pandemic was sweeping the nation. In an effort to curb the spread, an inoculation procedure was developed. The doctor used a sharp instrument to cut into Bernard's skin and inserted pus from a live smallpox pustule. After receiving his inoculation, the young McFadden had a horrible reaction and became severely ill. Being bedridden for months required constant care from his loving mother. McFadden's world was forever changed when a doctor was testing a new patent medicine for tuberculosis on his mother. Tragically, his mother died the following day, and McFadden believed the medicine administered by the doctor caused her untimely death. Bernard was heartbroken. His life seemed hopeless. After losing both of his parents, he was truly alone and destitute. And not having any immediate family, he was placed into an orphanage.
I'd like to take a break right here and just tell you a quick story about a movie script that I wrote back in the 1980s. This script embodies the American dream, the story of a poor orphan boy who becomes a multi-millionaire. Believe it or not, I got this script to some very, very important Hollywood personalities. One of them being Kirk Douglas, who wrote me back a very nice letter. Secondly, Greg Madej, who was an executive producer at Warner Brothers. Greg never wrote me a letter, but he actually called me on the phone and we talked for a while. Greg said, my father read it, he loves it, he knew Bernard McFadden. He says, this is the best story of all, but he says, everybody I talked to did not know the name Bernard McFadden. It would be impossible to get any backing to make a movie about this person. So I began to shop the script around, and those people that did read the script told me they thought the most heart-rendering, poignant parts of the script were about McFadden's days in the orphanage. No words could describe the brutality of an orphanage in those dark days following the Civil War. As we told you earlier in the production, we don't have any funding for this, but we are going to do one reenactment from two great actors that just happen to be my grandsons, Hunter and Sawyer, reading from my script.
Bernard, you're so out of breath. Stop moving those heavy boxes. I want to. I'm building up my strength. Do you remember what the doctor said? He said I was too weak to run, swim, play sports, or anything like that. The doctor was wrong, Ed. It doesn't matter. We'll never be able to leave this horrible place anyway. Yes, we will, and someday I'll make sure nobody has to live like this ever again.
What's really amazing is that McFadden kept his promise and built an orphanage for homeless boys. And believe me, the conditions at McFadden's orphanage were infinitely superior to anything he ever knew growing up in an orphanage as a young boy. But now, let's return to the case to restore the legacy of Bernard McFadden.
Okay, it's time that we quickly recap the events of McFadden's childhood that shaped his character. McFadden's childhood was more like a nightmare. Any child's nightmare. I mean, he was totally alone. He was dirt poor. He grew up in a horrible place where he was mistreated, he was unwanted, and he was unloved. Now hold on to that for just a second, and I need you to do me a favor and listen to this next part because it's really going to come into play. McFadden truly believed that the vaccination that the doctor gave him caused him to become deadly ill to the point where he was bedridden for months. Not days, not weeks, bedridden for months. And McFadden truly believed that the patent medicine that the doctor gave his mother killed her. And then that same doctor tells a young McFadden that he's too weak and he's too sick to do any kind of physical activity. Well, McFadden didn't believe that. He had to prove that doctor wrong. And he did when he transformed his body and he transformed his life. But we'll talk about that later on. Right now, though, we have a little insider scoop. Straight from Bernard McFadden's right-hand man, Mr. Ed Bowden. In the orphanage, in the evenings, McFadden used to lie awake in bed and he used to listen for the sound of the railroad trains. And then, on one dark and stormy night, he escaped. McFadden escaped from the orphanage. He ran away. But where was he going? What was the turning point? When McFadden found shelter in the boxcar of a slow-moving freight train. And he shared that boxcar with a very wise and a very special Native American who not only changed McFadden's life, but shaped his destiny. And I love this next part. I really do, because right now it is finally time that everybody learns how the father of wellness, the great Bernard McFadden, received his education.
When McFadden was invited to stay with a Native American tribe, he learned that nature provided everything a man needed to live and remain healthy. The Native American concept of healing incorporates body, mind, and spirit, and stresses the importance of keeping all three in balance. Their tribe shared vast knowledge of the healing powers found in plants and herbs to cure illness, as well as maintain personal health and physical vitality. And Bernard proved to be a willing student and quickly learned how to tap into the power and principles of natural healing, to the point that he knew more about natural healing than most medical practitioners at the time. McFadden vowed to teach the world about the healing power of nature and began his crusade for wellness. A movement that was 100 years ahead of its time.
As you just heard, the Native American that Bernard McFadden met on the freight train really changed his life, changed his whole destiny. People ask me, why now, at age 86, are you taking all this time, all these pains to make a documentary at this point in your life? Because I think I owe it to McFadden. I owe it to Bernard McFadden, because his writings and his teachings that I learned at a very early age changed my life and changed my destiny. While getting ready today, my wife asked me, why are you wearing that shirt? She says, you only wear it on Veterans Day or Memorial Day. I wear this shirt, of course, to honor these great Americans who are honored on those days. Today I'm wearing it to honor another great American, another real patriot, Bernard McFadden. His main goal in life, his main objective in life, was to make the United States of America the healthiest nation on earth. Unfortunately, all the work that Bernard McFadden did during his lifetime to make America the healthiest nation in the world is no longer even being acknowledged. While the real fact is that he changed hundreds of thousands of lives, including mine. As a young boy growing up, I couldn't make any of the teams in school, the basketball team, the baseball team, the football, nothing. I wanted to be an athlete. I wanted to be stronger. I had the very good fortune to run across some books that McFadden had written at a very early age. I think it was around 13 years old. The things that was in that book, I read and I reread. Following the writings and teachings of Bernard McFadden changed my entire life, and it shaped my destiny. Honestly, that's a true story. At this time, I'd like to offer myself as living proof that McFadden's teachings really worked. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here we are. What you're looking at now is a photo of me as a professional athlete. Yes, actually a professional wrestler when I was only 19 years old. And this is me today, 67 years later, following the teachings of Bernard McFadden. And that's why I'm making this documentary. This is a biography on the life of Bernard McFadden, published by HarperCollins and written by Mark Adams. I got to know Mark pretty well because I did make some small contribution to the contents of this book. And Mark was kind enough to include me in his credits, saying that I had the only known collection of McFadden's personal papers. While rereading Mark Adams' book, I came to realize that there were some key and critical points regarding McFadden's earlier life that were never included in the original documentary. So right now, I'd like to share these key and critical events with you.
When McFadden escaped from the orphanage and boarded the freight train, his intention was to find his only known relatives in St. Louis, Missouri. But his destination was sidetracked by his time spent with the Native American tribe. And following this life-altering event, he ultimately found his way to St. Louis. He finally found his family in St. Louis, and he was given a job at a small newspaper owned by his cousin called the McEwen Brick. And it was there that he learned about the power of the press. Using his meager wages earned working at the newspaper, McFadden was able to join a gymnasium, where he became friends with George Baptiste, the strongest athlete at the gym who taught Bernard bodybuilding and wrestling. Baptiste ultimately became a world wrestling champion. In less than 1 year, by utilizing what he had learned from the Native Americans and Baptiste, McFadden transformed himself into a healthy, strong, muscular, formidable athlete. Baptiste urged Bernard to enter a national wrestling tournament as a welterweight. McFadden entered the tournament winning not only the welterweight class, but also the middleweight and heavyweight divisions. Based on this amazing feat, he gained national attention, but he knew he was missing one key element necessary for success. Based on the notoriety gained from the wrestling tournament, he was able to strike a barter deal with the Bunker Hill Military Academy in Illinois, where he became athletic director in return for his room, board, and education. Under his guidance as athletic director, the Academy won state championships in wrestling and football, while McFadden learned English, literature, and science. McFadden met Alexander Whitley, the inventor of a wall-mounted exercise device consisting of cables and pulleys. Whitley offered Bernard a job demonstrating his exercise device at the 1893 World's Fair. Encouraged by his great success at the fair, McFadden felt it was now time to follow his dream to educate the nation on the power of natural healing and health. McFadden moves to New York City. McFadden launches Physical Culture magazine, the beginning of his publishing empire.
Now let's go back to some footage from the original documentary. Bernard McFadden is now in New York, and he started his first magazine that he called Physical Culture.
As sales of Physical Culture grew, so did the size of the magazine, giving McFadden more room to expound on his theories of health and fitness, while venting his rage against what he called the medical monopoly and prescription drugs. By 1903, the monthly sales of Physical Culture magazine were exceeding 100,000 a month and growing with each issue. McFadden now had enough money to make a dream come true, which was the establishment of a total health community with all its residents following the laws of nature. He bought a 1,900-acre tract of land in the state of New Jersey and proceeded to erect Physical Culture City, which, according to the literature, was free from saloons, drugstores, and other vices. McFadden's intent for Physical Culture City was to prove to the world that healthy, natural living can prevent illness and disease without the intervention of surgery or drugs. The initial success was very encouraging. But other forces were at work that would soon interrupt McFadden's success. In 1904, it appeared to McFadden that nothing could interfere with his mission to convert the nation to a healthy land of physical culturists. The growing number of physical culture readers were invited to send the magazine before and after photos of themselves to show the progress they had made using McFadden's methods. Obviously elated by the photos, McFadden decided to present the nation's first bodybuilding contest to determine the world's most perfectly developed man and woman. The site of his groundbreaking event would be Madison Square Garden in New York. This would be yet another vehicle to awaken the nation to the power of physical culture. The event was greeted by a sold-out crowd. The contestants in McFadden's Perfect Man, Perfect Woman contest looked much different than you might expect. The women wore a tight bodysuit covering their entire torso, anchored by a sash around their waist, leaving only their arms and legs exposed. The male contestants wore trunks, practically up to their navel. Modest dress by today's standards of two-piece and bikini swimsuits, but this was 1904, when a conservative group called the Prudes were instrumental in monitoring the moral conduct of the nation. Anthony Comstock, a zealous prude, was head of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. Comstock openly opposed McFadden's showing of flesh in his magazines and his bodybuilding expositions. In 1905, McFadden began advertising another bodybuilding competition, and Comstock brought legal action on the grounds of lewdness, but the show was held before another sellout crowd. Law enforcement officers were stationed throughout the arena to monitor the propriety of the show, and those wishing to see feminine flesh were disappointed because all female contestants now wore full-body union suits. Comstock and his prudes were relentless in mounting countless legal challenges against McFadden, his magazines, and his physical culture activities. In 1910, staggering legal expenses forced McFadden to leave his company in the hands of a trusted associate and travel to England.
A pornographer that distributes lewd and obscene content through the mail. Let me read that just one more time, okay? A pornographer that distributes lewd and obscene content through the mail. That's what the Prudes were saying about Bernard McFadden. Let's ask ourselves a question. Was this slander? Or did the Prudes have a point? After all, this was taking place during the Victorian era.
There was a time in our nation now called the Victorian era, so called because of the strict morality code enforced in England by Queen Victoria that still dominated the culture of America in the beginning of the 20th century. This drawing shows a shoe store salesman using the required modesty panel that obstructed any view of the female customer's leg.
At this time period, I guess you could say that the Prudes did have a point. But do you know what else the Prudes had? A political insider.
And the political insider's name was Mr. Anthony Comstock, and he lobbied Congress to pass the Comstock Law, banning all mailings of all materials of a sexual nature. And as a special agent for the United States Postal Service, Comstock confiscated thousands of books and pictures he deemed objectionable. Over 3,000 arrests were made for the violations of the Comstock Law. Now, this cover of a book about Comstock tells how he fought and won the battle for the purity of the nation.
Did you know that Bernard McFadden was an advocate for feminism? Probably not, but okay. He felt that he was empowering women to have greater control of their own body, their own health, and the clothing that they chose to wear.
At this time, female American swimmers were actually banned from taking part in the Olympic Games due to the immodest swimming attire that was required. In 1906, McFadden began publishing a series of articles in Physical Culture called Growing to Manhood in a Civilized World. This series of articles were meant to warn his male and female readers about the horrors and suffering caused by venereal diseases. And what would appear to be worthwhile information was viewed by Comstock and the Pruitts as pornography. So they approached the courts requesting for McFadden's arrest because his magazine contained lewd and obscene content. On October 22, 1907, a federal court in New Jersey sentenced McFadden to 2 years hard labor and a $2,000 fine. However, President William H. Taft commuted his sentence, but ruled that McFadden paid the $2,000 fine. One of the exhibits used by the prosecution was a small statue of the classic sculpture of the Venus de Milo, which the arresting officers took off McFadden's desk. And the court agreed that this statue represented pornography.